Hey guys, so we have been doing a little bit of math this week, and hopefully you haven't been falling behind. Bank balance sheets and the money multiplier and all of that is absolutely my nemesis. I don't like bank balance sheets. Some people do. That is their own. I do want to add something to what we've been talking about, and then I want to do some FRQ practice when it comes to bank balance sheets, because if 2020 has taught us anything, it is to expect the worst and just bad luck. So, will College Board have an FRQ about bank balance sheets? God, I hope not. Is 2020 going in a way that I totally expect it to be on there? Yeah, it is. So, that being said, I want to talk about that money multiplier really quick. A lot of you guys did really, really well on the question that I posed about if you deposit $200 and the required reserve ratio is 10%, how much can the bank loan out, and then how much can like money supply change by? Okay, so I want to put that formula that you use. The max change or change max or whatever, max change in money supply is that excess reserves. Remember, it's like the money left over, excess reserves times M, where M, the money multiplier, is 1 over the required reserve ratio. Well, that's one of the questions that they'll be probably asking on the AP exam. Who knows? They ask this a lot. The maximum change in money supply. And so in our example that we did the other day, if you deposited $200, some of that is taken out for required reserves. Whatever's left over is excess reserves. So that was $200 deposit. You minus 20 or 10% of that, which is $20. And you get $180. And that's how much can be loaned out. That's what's in excess reserves, $180. And that's what can be loaned out by the bank. They can't touch all $200 of your deposit. They can only touch what is left over after you take out the required reserves. And then you multiply it by that money multiplier. In our example, our required reserves was 10%, so 0.1. And the money multiplier is 1 over RR, or 1 over 0.1, which in this case is 10. So we multiplied 180 times 10, and we got $1,800 is the max change that we're going to have in money supply. But if you watch that, it's like 2-minute, 3-minute video clip from Mr. Clifford, he had 2 problems. He had a problem about a deposit, but then he also had a problem, a math problem, about where the, I think it was the Federal Reserve bought a bond for, I forget how much it was. I think it was 200, but I don't want to use the exact same number. If the Fed buys a bond for, let's say, $500 from the bank, the Fed buys the bond and hands them $500 to the bank. Well, all $500 is going to go into excess reserves, because if you remember, the definition of required reserves is a percent of deposits. Buying a bond is not a deposit. It's a bond. It's not money. It's not a customer coming in to make a deposit to their account. It's the Federal Reserve buying a bond. And all $500 goes into excess. And so it's the entire $500 bond times that money multiplier is going to give us some sort of max change in money supply. Money supply. That's an M. So the equation is still the same. It's excess reserves times M, but sometimes excess reserves is the entire bond. If it's a bond, it's that entire amount. If it is a deposit, it's only what's left over after excess reserves. So that's one equation that we're going to be using with monetary policy. The other one is a little bit different. It's max change in the banking system. They might say max change in the bank. They say maximum possible change in banking, something like that, where it's like they mentioned the bank. Well, the bank, what's silly about the bank is it has all the money. It has excess reserves and required reserves. So if you remember doing your, let's see if I can bring it up. Oh, I don't have a picture of it. I'm looking. It's not popping up. Okay, here we go. Here's an example of a bank balance sheet. And we're going to do this FRQ in just a little bit. But you see that the bank has the required reserves and it has excess reserves. The entire deposit, all of your deposit, whether it's 90% here and 10% there, or 80% here and 20% there, the entire bank has all of your deposit. So the change in the banking system is the deposit times M. So if it talks about money supply, you have to take a number out. You have to take some sort of percentage out and only have excess reserves. But if asked for a change in the banking system, you're going to take that entire $200 deposit that we had in our problem the other day, and then you're going to multiply it by M and get $2,000. So in this example, it was 2,000 because M was 1 over 0.1, so it's 10. So here's the possible scenario. They might say you deposit $200. What happens to change in money supply? That's one question, which is $1,800 change. Or they can say, what's the maximum change in the banking system? Which is going to be more because you're taking the entire deposit. You don't have to take anything out. So depending on the wordage of the question, yesterday I just talked about money supply, but now on, I can ask about money supply or change in the banking system. Banking system, you just take an entire deposit times the money multiplier or bond purchase or whatever they're doing. Money supply, though, you have to take out a percentage if it's a deposit question. If it's another bond question like Mr. Clifford did, it's the same thing as here. It's this entire bond purchase times the money multiplier. But if it's a deposit, like in this case, you deposited $200, you have to take away some percentage of that $200, of that deposit that goes in required reserves. Because the definition of required reserves is a percentage of deposits that must be kept in the bank. It's not a percentage of loans. It's not a percentage of bonds. It's not a percentage of anything else. It's a percentage of deposits. So if it's a deposit question, you have to take a percentage out. If it's not, then you don't. And is it, whether it's money supply or the banking system, you're still multiplying it by M, but it's the entire amount for banking system versus just what you can loan out for money supply. Hopefully that makes sense. It's not my favorite thing to teach. Definitely not my favorite thing to teach. So that is more information about the money multiplier problem. Okay, from here, I'm going to give you this little FRQ to practice. And then, is this the same FRQ as this one? Hold on. That was what, meets you at a bank. This is, I have two FRQs that I found for bank balance sheets. So I want to give them to you. I want you to pause and then, okay, this is two different problems. Okay, fantastic. So we have two FRQs that we're going to practice. Here's the first one, and then I'm going to ask you to pause it, and then we'll go over it, and then I'll give you the second one, ask you to pause it and do it, and then we'll go over it. So here's the first FRQ, and it should take about 10 minutes, 15 minutes to do. Okay, so if you wanted to, you could call up one of your friends, you could FaceTime them or whatever, and then y'all could do it together. Learning is social, and this whole experience has taken the social part out of learning and kind of made it harder. So here it is. Okay. The following is a simplified balance sheet for Multiplier Bank of the United States. Here we have assets and liabilities. We have $10,000 in required reserves, $5,000 in excess reserves, and it seems like $85,000 in loans. Demand deposits are $100,000, and the equity is 0, meaning if the equity is 0, that means both sides balance out. And you could do some math and figure out 85 plus 5 plus 10 is 100,000, and you have 100,000 on this side. So that's just saying these two sides balance out, and there's nothing else that we need to have on here. On A, it says, what is the reserve requirement? B says, assume that Luis withdraws $5,000 in cash from his checking account at Multiplier Bank. I, how much will Multiplier Bank's reserves change based on Luis's withdrawal? Double I, what is the initial effect of the withdrawal on the M1 measure of money supply, and explain? Triple I, as a result of the withdrawal, what is the new value of excess reserves on the balance sheet of Multiplier Bank based on the reserve requirements from Part A? And C, assume that the next day, John withdraws from Multiplier Bank an amount that exceeds the bank's excess reserves. Assuming that no loans are called in, how can Multiplier Bank cover its required reserves? Okay, so right now I want you to pause. I'm going to give yourself 10 minutes and then try to figure it out. If you get stuck, then you can press play, or if you're done, press play, and then we'll go over it. Okay, so hopefully you actually paused and didn't just like, we'll do it together, Miss Taylor. Maybe you could figure out A on yourself. Okay, so A says, what is the required reserve? It doesn't say ratio, and it's probably not asking for the amount. So you're like, well, which one is it? Am I looking for percentage here, or am I looking for the amount here? Why not write both? Because I've seen some FRQs where it says, what is the reserve requirement? And the key had a percentage. And then some years, the same question, and then the key had the number. And it's like, well, did they count it wrong if they wrote the other thing? So I would write both. The reserve requirement in this case is 10%. Because if you see, we have $100,000 in demand deposits, and of that $100,000, $10,000 of it is in required reserves. That's 10%. So I would write $10,000 or, what am I writing? I would write 10% or I would write $10,000. That's what I would write. Like I would literally write that as my answer, 10% or $10,000. On B, we have multiple parts. It says, assume that Luis withdraws $5,000 in cash from his checking account at Multiplier Bank. How much will the reserves change based on the withdrawal? So notice how it says reserves. It doesn't say required or excess. It means all of them. So if you see the word reserves, I'm going to write this off to the side. Reserves, or you can say total reserves, is excess reserves plus required reserves. So if you see reserves or total reserves, that's what they mean. They mean both. So here's what I'm going to do. I want only my answers here. I'm going to show my work on the other side. I can't write on this, but I would just write on the FRQ. Unfortunately, your FRQ is going to be on the computer, and, I don't know how that's going to work. Okay. So demand deposits of $100,000, required reserves, excess reserves, loans. We have 10,000, 5,000, 85,000. Okay, so if someone comes in and they withdraw $5,000, then $100,000 is like, that's how much is deposited. They withdraw $5,000 from it. So the amount of demand deposits is going to fall by $5,000. So $100,000 is going to be changed to $95,000. I took out $5,000 of the withdrawal. But where does it come from? It comes from the liability side, but it also comes from this side because now there's less liabilities because there's also less assets. So someone comes and withdraws $5,000. I have to give them $5,000 from the money in the vault. This right here is the vault. Excess reserves and required reserves is in the money in the vault. Money I can touch and money I can't touch. But here's the thing. They withdraw $5,000. I'm going to have to give it to them. It's going to come from the vault. It's going to come from the money I can touch, which is $5,000. They took $5,000, which was all I had left. So there's 0 in excess reserves. for now. So how much did it change by? There was 10,000 and 5,000. Now it's 10,000 and 0. It fell by $5,000. Okay, this question is not, it decreased by 5,000. This question is not hard. This question literally says, if someone comes and withdraws $5,000 from the bank, how much money does the bank have less? 5,000. That's what the question's asking. It's like, if someone took 2 pencils away from you, how many pencils do they take? 2. The answer is 2. Or in this case, 5,000. That's I. Let's talk about double I. What is the initial effect on M1 measure of money supply? Okay, so this is the whole M1, M2, M3. Well, it looked like he withdrew $5,000 in cash from his checking account. Both are types of M1. So it's going to go from one type of M1, checking, to another type of M1, cash. They're both M1, so it cancels out. For B double I, what happens to M1? Nothing. No change, because they're both M1. And it even says explain. So no change. Ugh, what am I writing? I was going to write change. Silly me. No change. Because both M1, both cash and checking, are M1. And triple I. As a result of the withdrawal, what is the new value of excess reserves? Okay, well, I already drew my little T-chart here. Don't be so quick to say 0, because if you remember, our required reserves is 10%. We figured that out on part A. 10% of this number needs to be in required reserves. Well, 10% of 95,000 is not 10,000, it's 9,500. So of this 10,000, only 9,500 of it needs to be kept in the vault. The other amount can be freed up and be loaned out. And so I only need to keep 10% of this number in here, which is 9,500. So where'd the other 500 go? In excess reserves. It just freed up $500 because since there's less money in here, there's less money that's required to be kept in the bank at all times. And so the other money, whatever's left over, is freed up. So the new value of excess reserves is $500. So triple I, 500. And C. The next day, John withdraws an amount that exceeds excess reserves. It exceeds $500. How will this bank call in its excess reserves, assuming that no loans are called in? Well, there's 2 answers here. If someone comes in and tries to take out more money than the bank has, either the bank borrows from other banks, that's one answer. Or, the Federal Reserve is the lender of last resort, or the bank borrows from the Fed. Remember, if the bank borrows from another bank, they're going to have to pay a special interest rate from bank to bank. Do you remember what that's called? It's called the federal funds rate. But if they borrow from the Federal Reserve, then they're going to have to pay the discount rate. Remember, 2 different names of interest rates. Bank to bank is federal funds rate. Fed to bank is going to be the discount rate. So those are the answers on this FRQ. Okay. Let me clear everything, and then I'll show you the second FRQ. And that's what we're going to work on today. Okay, the second FRQ is on AP Classroom. Okay. Okay, I don't need that top part. Okay, it says the following is a balance sheet of First Superior Bank. So we have an asset side, liability side. Assets, it says $200 in reserves. Loans is $1,800. For demand deposits, it's $2,000. And it looks like we have a bank balance sheet that is completely balanced because our net worth is 0. Okay. It says, assume the required reserve ratio is 10%. Okay, they're giving it to us right off the bat. Okay, assume the reserve requirement is 10%. A, what is the dollar value of new loans that First Superior Bank can make and explain? B, Mr. Smith deposits $100 in cash in demand deposits account at First Superior Bank. Calculate the maximum amount of new loans that the First Superior Bank can now make. C, as a result of Mr. Smith's $100 cash deposit, calculate the maximum change over time in each of the following in the banking system: loans, demand deposits. And D, as a result of Mr. Smith's cash deposit, $100 cash deposit, calculate the maximum change over time in money supply. And E, provide one reason why the actual change in money supply can be smaller than the maximum change you identified in part D. Okay, this one is no joke. This is a type of bank balance sheet that keeps me up at night, and I'm so worried that it's not that it's hard, it's that it's worded funny. The math is really easy, but the way that they word it and wondering what they're asking can be tricky. So I want you to pause it, try your best, and then we'll come back and we'll do it together. I hope you're pausing it. Okay, so let's say you paused it. Hello, dear.
Hello, how are you? I'm good. Yeah.
You just finished watching your movie?
No, we're gonna finish tomorrow.
We're going to finish tomorrow. Okay, well, it's time for you to go to bed.
Okay, I'm gonna go brush my teeth.
Okay. I'll be in there just a little bit, okay?
Okay. Be in there in like 10 minutes.
I'll try my best. Okay.
Be in there in 47 minutes.
47 minutes? God, I hope you're asleep by then. Okay. So here's the thing. The first question starts off, it's not a trick question, but it's definitely a question that's not going to set you up for success. So I'm someone that I have to write on my bank balance sheet. I can't just see it. So I'm going to write it over again. Assets, liabilities. We have reserves, which is 200. The demand deposits are 2,000. Equity is 0, and the loans are 1,800. Okay. And then it says, assume the reserve requirement is 10%, meaning 10% of demand deposits is in required reserves. 10% of this number has to be kept in the bank at all times. And then A, it says, what is the dollar value of new loans that this bank can make? Okay, this is already titled loans. That means this has already been loaned out. So it's not 1,800. Okay, so what's A if it's not 1,800? Remember, we can only loan out what's in excess reserves. Well, notice how it says reserves here? This was intentional. It does not say required. It does not say excess. It's reserves, meaning total reserves. Our total reserves in this case is $200. That number includes both excess and required, because total reserves is excess reserves plus required reserves. So let's figure out how much of this I can loan out. Do you remember what the required reserve ratio was in this problem? It's 10%. 10% of this number. 10% of 2,000 is 200. So of this amount, $200 of it is required reserves. What's left over for excess? Nothing, because there's only $200 in here. If it had been 300, then I'd say 100 is left over if you take away 200, but there's only 200 in here, which means nothing is left over in excess reserves, which means they cannot make any new loans. Everything has been loaned out already, and there's nothing left in excess. So 0. And you would say, because it's already loaned out, because no excess reserves. Okay. No excess reserves. I have to go fast now. B, Mr. Smith deposits $100 in cash. I know. I only have so much space left on whatever. Okay. Mr. Smith, oh my gosh. Yes, okay. Mr. Smith deposits $100 in cash in his demand deposit account. Calculate the maximum amount of new loans that they can now make. He deposits $100 in cash Yes, I get it. It's going to be paused soon. I understand. Okay, if you help me. If that pops up one more time, I'm going to lose my cool. Whoever screenshot grabbed me the other day responding to a kitty cat that I saw outside the window and then posted it on like social media. Not cool. Okay, I am not a meme. All right, I'm gonna obviously have to pause this and then make this a 2-part video. So Mr. Smith and what happens to him is coming up soon in a different video. Part 2. Hooray. Okay, make this stop. Just make it stop. Stop it. Make it stop. Stop. Oh my God. Stop. Stop. Okay, so I cleared up some of my storage space on my computer, and apparently it had nothing to do with Screencastify. It was the fact that my downloads and the fact that Matthew has been shooting videos of him building Legos as if he's some sort of influencer on YouTube. Anyway, it was crowding up my space on my Chromebook. So I cleared all that out. And now we can finish along with Mr. Smith, which was like an hour has passed since then. So, okay. Mr. Smith deposits $100 in cash in his demand deposit account. Did I erase everything? No, I didn't. Okay. So he deposited $100 into his account. How many new loans can they make? Well, they can make whatever they can't touch. They can loan out whatever they can't touch. And it said in Part A, or before Part A, the RRR is 10%. So they have to keep 10% of all deposits in the bank at all times. The rest goes into excess reserves. So if he deposits $100, 10% of that gets taken out, which is $10. So they can loan out $90. So on B, how many can they loan? What's the max amount of new loans they can make? $90 because of his deposit. On C, it says, as a result of Mr. Smith's $100 cash deposit, calculate maximum change over time. If you see maximum change over time, you're going to probably be multiplying it by the money multiplier. In each of the following: new loans and demand deposits. Okay, so at the beginning of this video, I talked about like the difference between maximum change in money supply and maximum change in the banking system. Well, you can change money supply by loaning out money to people. And so remember, the max change in money supply is like excess reserves times M. Well, excess reserves is like what you can loan out. That's what CI is talking about. Basically, they're not saying maximum change in money supply, but they're saying, like, if I loan out, what's the maximum change it's going to be? Well, they're going to loan out $90 from Part B, $90 times the money multiplier. Remember, the money multiplier is 1 over RRR. In this case, it's 1 over 0.1, which is 10. So it's 90 times 10, which is $900 on CI. CII is talking about demand deposits, which is tricky because this is when you're going to be using the max change in the banking system. It doesn't say banking system, but it's saying demand deposits, which is our checking account. And in our checking account is the money you can touch and the money you can't touch, which is all reserves, which is the entire banking system. It's just, I don't know why they can't just say banking system, but that's what this question is saying. So you would take the entire deposit of Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith's entire deposit on CII, you take all of his $100 times the money multiplier, and so it's $1,000. So the first one, when talking about loans, is you can only loan out what's in excess reserves. So we only take what's in excess reserves and multiply that by 10. The second part is like it says demand deposits. You're going to take the entire demand deposit times the money multiplier to get $1,000. On D, It says, as a result of Mr. Smith's $100 cash deposit, calculate the maximum change in over time in money supply. And you're probably thinking, didn't we just do that? Wasn't this problem right here maximum change in money supply where we took excess reserves times the money multiplier? Yeah, we did. CI is when we do the math. D, when it's like maximum change in money supply, this is, we already did the math. The answer is the same because the question is the same. And you're probably wondering, why would they ask the same question twice? Well, the first time they asked it as a math question where you actually have to do math. The second time they asked the question, it's a vocabulary question. They're asking you, do you know that loans is what creates money supply? So the first time they're talking about loans and the second time they're talking about money supply, they're trying to get you to make the connection of that's the same question because those are the same things. What a bank can loan out turns into money supply. So when we did loans times 10 earlier, that's correct. Same thing here. It's the same amount times the same thing. It's the same answer because it's the same question. And E, which I'm not going to have room to write, but it says, provide one reason why the actual change in money supply could be smaller than what you identified in Part D. Well, this is only the case if they loan out all of Mr. Smith's $90. What if they only loan out 70 or 89 or 2? If they loan out less than their excess reserves, then it's going to have a smaller change in money supply. So if they didn't loan out all of their excess reserves, then you're going to get an answer smaller than 900 of change in money supply. Okay, it's not too difficult. The math is not hard. It's the wording that gets people on the money, on the bank balance sheets and on money multiplier and things like that. Of when do I use it and what is it asking and what numbers do I use and how far do I go? And I hate bank balance sheets. But the end is near in terms of monetary policy and in terms of our content. So I think we can just push through. So those were 2 FRQs about bank balance sheets and where we use the money multiplier and the difference between change in money supply and change in the banking system, also called change in maximum loans over time and demand deposits over time. So anyway, if you have questions, be sure to come to office hours this week with loads of them. And I'm going to see if I can somehow connect my first video to the second video so it's not 2 separate things. All right, bye guys.